James, thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure. I'm excited. It's my
Yeah,
first
likewise.
podcast. I don't think I told you that, but
First podcast. Okay.
I had to break the ice somewhere. I've been asking everyone. You're the first who said yes.
Yeah, just begging people left
Please.
and right. Well, I'm very glad we can be the first, the first of many. After people hear this episode, you're going to be, getting invited all the time.
Yeah. Watch out, Daily.
Yeah. Well, give us a quick background on who you are and yourself and what you're up to now with Willow Education.
Yeah, absolutely. In sincerity, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. I appreciate the work you do with some of the best networks and schools in the country. I describe myself as a recovering charter school founder and CEO. I started and led Rocky Mountain Prep, which I'm incredibly proud of. I started in 2010. We opened our doors in 2012 with our first campus. And I handed off the reins to my incredibly capable successor, Trisha Noyola, in 2021. And since then, I've left Denver, moved to Vermont, Middlebury, Vermont. It is a happy wife, happy life strategy. My in-laws are all in New England, and so far so good. We love it here. I do miss the good community in Denver. It's always fun to go back. And what I'm working on now is I'll try and give the short version, then we can weave a little bit in.
Okay, sounds good.
When I was leading RMP and as a systems leader in Denver, I became obsessed with post-secondary success and too often lack of success. And what that looked like in Denver, across Denver public schools, inclusive of charters, the majority of students who graduate and go to college are first in their families to do so. I don't think that'll surprise most of your listeners, but certainly the case in Denver. And the majority of those students by far go to an institution called Metro State University. And Metro has, what's your guess for the on-time graduation rate for a first-gen student at Metro?
Oh, man. It's probably worse than I would guess. I was
going
to say
good.
Like 60, 70%, hopefully.
What an optimist. Do you want to revise your guess?
Way lower. 20%? Yes. I don't know.
9% of first-gen students will graduate on time, and only 24% will graduate within 6 years. And so I don't know how we can look at those data and ever send kids to Metro again, especially if they're first in their families to do so. And so once you get done being mad at Metro and trying to convince kids not to go there, which is actually somewhat difficult and challenging because their materials are slick and a lot of their friends go, there's an obvious question of like, so where should students go? If we want to have students on the path to quality choice field lives and quality jobs, where should we help them find those next steps and paths? And that's the question that's been driving my work for the past now 2.5 years with launching Willow. And I get to work with some of the best networks in the country, all of my friends doing the hard and important work who are really digging into that question to help their students find a sense of purpose and an understanding of who they are and who they might want to be and what they want their lives to look like when they grow up, and what careers are out there, because we believe you can't be what you can't see. And so let's give kids an opportunity to explore that and understand that. And then a lot of work helping them find a quality, concrete next step, whether that be into college programs, which many of our students do, and we love great college programs, or into quality workforce, what we call professional programs. And so that's what we do with Willow. We're a curriculum and a platform that schools use to try and get this work right.
Well, I want to go back to the stat you shared. I think you said 9. Is it 9%?
9 on time, 24% ever.
24% ever. Really kind of shocking numbers. I mean, certainly I was way off, and I'm guessing that's not a stat that Metro or any organization similar, I don't want to just pick on them, that is in the brochures or that is being broadcasted to families. I'm sure they're more than happy to accept and matriculate as many students as they can. And I want to talk about that stat for a second, because when you and I were talking about, some interesting topics that we could discuss, one of the things that came up was data-driven leadership. Because I think this isn't unique to post-secondary success. Obviously, this is, the thread we'll pull through this conversation, but there's other times where really shocking data comes out about student performance, student outcomes, and it kind of begs the question, what do we do? Like, clearly something's not working. Change needs to happen. And it can be a little daunting to think about where to begin. And so that's what I want to kind of unpack with you today. And I wanted to ask you, as you reflect on your time, founding RMP and running that organization, why do you think data-driven decision-making is so critical, particularly as a school leader, and maybe what makes it so hard?
I feel like I've got more insights on the latter part of that question than the former. And I think I was a little bit intimidated by the topic because I feel like this is something I didn't get right a lot of the time when I was leading RMP, and continue to be a student of this work of how do you get this right and how do you try and figure it out. And I don't know if it's actually possible to have one or two crisp priorities in schools like every business book tells you you're supposed to do, and many of us have tried to do with only moderate success. There's some great people in the work, my successor Tricia Noyola included, and some other great leaders out of Achievement First does this really well, who I think convinced me one side of my brain that you can do it and it's a worthy pursuit. And then at times there's just so much coming at you when you're in schools and you're responsible for everything. It is really, really challenging to prioritize. So I think my first big backdrop is, yes, it matters, and it's damn near impossible to get it right. And so try not to beat yourself up too much if it's something you're struggling with. What I've learned largely through failures and sometimes getting it right is we're not often enough focusing on the questions that matter most in our school systems and at the right altitude. And so I believe that we should start actually kind of thinking about the board level and the annual review level, and then backing into what am I going to commit sharing with the board every quarter, and are they centered around, are we asking the right questions, and then lining up the measures to those questions. So too often we're looking at the measures first and not looking at the questions we want to be able to answer and then putting those underneath.
Could you give some examples?
Absolutely. So are our students learning? Are we creating a rigorous and loving culture where students thrive? Are we preparing our students to go on and live choice-filled lives where they can find quality jobs? Do we have a responsible financial model that allows us to invest our resources effectively towards those pursuits? There's a book that I loved that I used with our team called The 4 Disciplines of Execution, or 4DX for short, that I think does a nice job of splitting the world between what's a leading indicator, what are things that we want to repeatedly do that we think will drive performance against a metric, versus a lagging indicator. Daniel, I'm curious, you work a lot with operations teams. What are you seeing against this question around what's working and not with data-driven leadership in your world? You didn't know I was going to turn the table on you, did you?
Yeah. What the heck? I'm supposed to be asking the questions. Well, I would say, I think your comment about focusing on the questions, the first, what I would call first principles questions, is the right place to start. I think what happens a lot in operations teams is a KPI gets created by someone at some point in time, and then the whole organization gets indexed around that KPI or that set of KPIs. And it really takes a first principles thinking leader to come back and say, why are we even tracking this? What's the, maybe this is what you're getting at around leading versus lagging indicators. And so what I would say is, the best operations teams that we interact with often have a KPI that's more unique than what you would think of. And just to use, going back to some of the questions you pose, are our students learning? They're sort of the low-hanging fruit KPI there, like test scores or something like that, where it's okay, everyone uses this metric, the state uses this metric, but are there other metrics that actually are a better indicator for whether or not students are learning? And so I think that's true on the academic side of the house, but really true on the operations side of the house, where it's not just, if this is just off the cuff, a financial team, it's not just budget versus actuals. That's actually a very basic metric. It's looking at proactive forecasting, and do our principals know how to read a P&L? That's a next level benchmark for financial sustainability versus just like, are we within our BVA report? So that's I kind of agree with the original point you made around, are we asking the right questions, and then I think the next step is, are we designing the right KPIs, or are we looking at the right data? Which is maybe an interesting next question for you, just around data-driven decision making. I think that's become a little bit of a buzzword for leaders, as all things tend to eventually become. What do you think it means fundamentally to let data drive your decision making? Like, how do you interpret that from a leadership standpoint?
Good question. I think I go back to the questions. Like, are we asking the questions that we think are most important and that we're mission obligated to do for our organization? And then what are the data that will allow us to answer those questions that we have about that? I see a lot of, like, you talked a little bit about kind of the perverse impacts of data-driven leadership at times, where teams get overly focused on a myopic indicator or maybe a big indicator. Like, a lot of our friends, ourselves included, their goal and their mission was, we want all of our students admitted to a 4-year college. Well, guess what the institution in Denver is that will admit all students to the 4-year college?
Right. Yeah. Right.
And so the strategy was actually like, try and get kids into the best college they can. And then everyone else, like, come with me. We're going down to Metro. We're signing you up. And that's leading perversely, with a great intention, perversely leading to the worst outcome for our kids, which is that they're dropping out with debt. And we know that is the worst possible outcome from very good research that the Charter School Growth Fund has done with their early alumni career outcomes survey that they've been releasing for the past 2 years. And then also the New York Fed has similar research. And so I know I kind of quickly pivoted into the pitfalls, but I think, like, going back to, like, are we asking the right question? If we're getting disciplined about driving towards a metric like 100% college admission, is that leading to the outcomes that we want to have, that we're mission obligated to have? And if not, like, how do we manage the pitfalls associated with that?
Yeah, it seems like one of the things you're alluding to is being able to connect the student experience to the metric, like, to use your example, like, what's the student experience for those kids that went on to Metro versus the, like, we hit our 100% KPI for 4-year college. How do you think leaders can sort of tie the human component to the data component? Because I think inherently some of us sort of trend towards more of the, like, human emotional side of the mission, and others of us maybe are a little more data driven. We love to nerd out in the Excel sheet and track performance metrics. How do you feel like leaders can kind of bridge those two camps?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it's a bit of a leading question. It's one that I had to learn in my leadership. Is I am moved to action clearly by data around Metro State. I've now committed 3 years of my life to,
your whole organization,
to putting them out of business. Yeah. And that's a bit of a joke. Like, there's great people that work at Metro. They're trying to make it better, et cetera. And until it is better, like, I'm not going to want to send kids there. But most people are not moved to action by data or statistics. And so I believe strongly that, like, if every time a leader is in front of a team or talking about data or talking about results, the first thing that they have to start with is a student story that exemplifies usually the positive. Here's what happens when we win on this metric. And when we pull together and really succeed and focus as a team, or the negative, like, here's a really tough tale. Trisha brought up, now the CEO of Rocky Mountain Prep, brought up an alum that hadn't been successful in their post-secondary journey in front of the whole team this summer. And the kickoff of summer PD was like, here is what we've been achieving. Here's what happens to our students after they leave us. And here's a personal story of what that experience is like. And then here's what we're going to do in response. And so I think connecting the stories and the impact to where you're driving next matters a lot.
Yeah, that's super powerful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about identifying the right data, because I think this is actually one of the biggest challenges is accessing good data if you've ever done a project with a data scientist, they normally start by telling you your data's bad and that you can't work with bad data. So, and I think this is true broadly across a whole bunch of functions and disciplines, not just one kind of discrete thing. And maybe you can use post-secondary success, since that's the world you're stooped in right now, as an example. Could you talk to us a little bit about how leaders can identify what data points should we even be looking at? What's the most relevant and actionable for our specific goals? How do you, and your team coach leaders through that? And we can use the post-secondary world as the example, but there's probably principles for, kind of any department.
Yeah, if it's okay, let's start with actually some RMP operations data that we were looking at. I love metrics that are operational in nature and academic and student outcomes in impact. And a story around that. The obvious one is attendance. Are students coming every day? Are we getting them there? Are we removing barriers to be there so that they can learn when they're with us in schools? When I was leading RMP, we had an awesome COO, Greg Rawson, and he figured out if we could cut our attrition data in half, because we had a school in a very high mobility neighborhood, that it would improve our student performance by, I forget the exact number, but 20 or 25% in terms of average proficiency, which is kind of a staggering amount. And so that became obviously a focus of our operations and family facing teams to focus there. So for post-secondary, this is tough. Most people struggle with this and don't do this well. And most schools, I think NCAP can put out this survey, but I think 82% of high school leaders don't look ever at post-secondary data, and they're not obligated to. They're mission obligated, but not system obligated. There's no carrots and sticks around that. The data, the NCS data, National Student Clearinghouse, is the best data that tracks how students go into higher education. The questions that I think matter here that we help schools with. So we have our curriculum platform, and then we also do some strategy support to help schools set up their post-secondary teams. But what are students choosing to do after they leave you? What percentage are enrolling? Where are they enrolling? What are the caliber of the institutions they're enrolling in? How many are completing 4 and 6 years later? And then are students thriving? And we can use either direct survey data from the Charter School Growth Fund, or we can use it as a proxy to look at how are similar students thriving across the country.
Got it. So you're basically helping leaders go from here's the big question we're asking, and then these are all the sub points or kind of questions within the question that we're asking, and how can we work backwards to make sure we have data that answers those questions. What do you do around data storytelling? Because I think if I'm a leader, it's a hard pill to swallow when you start lifting up rocks and looking underneath and seeing the creepy crawlies. And I think
you want to go cry in the corner.
Yeah, exactly. I am a giant failure. Yeah. And we've all felt that. How do you resist the I can get this data to tell whatever story I want draw? Because I think, in some ways you can kind of get data to back up a number of narratives that you want to cling to. How do you think about that? And how do you all, maybe in your work with Willow, help leaders kind of cut through the noise to this is really your reality, and kind of guard against trying to see things in the data that maybe aren't necessarily there?
I actually think it's easier to design the right dashboard or approach or data strategies, and it's harder to have the discipline around using it every week, every month, and every quarter. And it's harder than have the discipline to communicate. These are our big 5 this year. And they're everywhere, and we're communicating to every stakeholder. This is what we're focused on this year, and we're then reporting back at the end of the year. This is how we did, and here's our scorecard against that. So yes, it's important to design the right metrics, but where I fell down more was on the discipline to communicate it and use it in every single meeting every week. So I think the easiest way to guard against this is to set it and forget it. So do the upfront design work, get it right, make sure you're answering the right questions and have the right data metrics underneath it, and then are committing to coming back to that. What does that cycle look like every month with your leadership team, or every week? What does that cycle look like every quarter, at least with your board? And then what does that look like as a school leader with your your grade level teams, etc. Trisha, I keep bragging about her great work at RMP, but she's got her big five every year. It's super transparent. All external stakeholders get it. She calls them the bathroom goals. So they're like posted in every single adult bathroom stall where you can't avoid staring down.
You will not hide from these
here
goals.
Here are our big five goals this year. And here's how we did last year. And I kind of love that mindset and discipline and creative communication strategies around just how to bring it alive and make it present everywhere. If you're doing something with that discipline, I think it's harder to hide behind our STAR data looks pretty good, but this other reading assessment data looks pretty bad. So let's talk about the STAR data this month, and then we'll hopscotch over to a different assessment moving forward. I think the regular discipline and teaching teams, these are the data that matter most, helps guard against that pitfall.
Yeah.
What have you seen, Daniel?
Well, I think you're hitting on the big question, which is how do we turn data into action? And I think that's the real challenge, right? It's number one, you have to find the data. Number two, you have to look at it honestly, pick up the rock and identify the creepy crawlies. And then it's, what are we going to do about it, right? How are we going to turn this data into action? And I think from my experience, the biggest challenge is accountability across departments, right? What we tend to see in organizations is there's one team or department or pocket within the organization. And typically it's because there's one leader in that team or pocket or department who's really good at this. And just the rest of the organization is not, where they have super clear goals and super clear accountability. And there's no hiding from it. Everyone on the team is benchmarked against it. It's a shared goal. It's not me as the leader and this is my special KPI. It's no, we're all in this together and we're going to fail together or we're going to succeed together. And so I love the example you gave of the bathroom goals, because I think, to your point, it's shining a light so that everyone is aware of what the goals are and showing here's what we did last year. It sort of forces accountability, right? My experience with humans is nobody likes to underperform. Nobody likes mediocrity, even if, maybe on the surface, people might say it seems that way, or oh, people are resigned to this. I don't think that's true. I just think there hasn't been accountability in place or transparency around
visibility. Totally.
Yeah. How we got here. So I mean, I think a lot of what you're talking about resonates deeply. What would you say if you were to give the kind of tactical, and let's again use maybe post-secondary success as a good example. What would you say is the tactical process for a leader to translate a data set into an action plan? Maybe talk us through that a little bit.
Where my head goes first while you're talking, regardless of the topic or team, is where does this show up on your calendar? Which meetings are you coming back to throughout the course of the year where you're going to talk about which data sets, because you'll have those in front of you. And that's true at every level, from the board to the kindergarten day-to-day, looking at student work. And you should and can calendar out what that looks like across a year at the start of the year. What that looks like in post-secondary success is most school systems don't really know what to do here. Our high-performing charter school systems, there's some great counterexamples to that, where they've got a pretty tight process and they know what they're great at and know what they're not. We believe you got to get 4 things right from a student experience here, and then I'll talk about what that looks like for the data perspective. But one is students have to build a sense of purpose, an identity, and the durable skills needed to be successful in their lives. That will evolve and iterate and grow as they have different experiences, good and bad, throughout their lives. 2 is schools have to provide, I believe, structured career exploration and work-based learning opportunities. The Growth Fund's early alumni survey data shows that doing those activities leads to $3,000 to $8,000 more average annual salary for students. So the ROI on doing that is massive and comparable to do a high quality academic program. Obviously, the best results happen when you have high quality career exploration and high quality academic program hand in hand. And that's that is absolutely the North Star. 3 is financial literacy, to help students understand like how to navigate the real world. And I believe a lot of value can be unlocked in supporting our students by helping them avoid known bad choices. And financial literacy is one of those things. Going to Metro is one of those things. That's probably like 70, 80% of the value here. It's just like, avoid those really bad choices. And here's a basket of like okay to great options to choose within. Most school systems don't know what to do. So I see our job is like trying to make that easy for them. And so that's why we have a curriculum for students to go through that plugs into advisory or college and career seminar, and then a platform that supports that. And so when I talk to school systems and school leaders is, do you have a clear vision for this? If not, like, let's build one or make one. It doesn't have to be rocket science. 2 is what's the time in the day or the calendar where this is going to show up for students, similar to the day-to-day meetings or the quarterly board meetings, whatever. And then what's the structure that you want to go through, and how do you make that cohesive and effective and transparent? And then we provide the data that you should be tracking. Like, we make that easy for you so that you don't have to make that up. That's like the simple version of how to get this right, in my opinion. Forget if I talked about college match. Like, I think most systems are getting college match right now, like how to write a great personal statement, how to, build a balanced list and apply the great next steps. So sorry if I missed that step. There's like some other things that you can get bonus points for that you should do after you have the core right, I believe, around like industry recognized certificates of value. That's a big buzzword right now. And Jobs for the Future, JFF, found that 80% of certificates found in K-12 school systems right now have no market value. And so like you have to do that thoughtfully, but some do and some have a lot. Strategic dual enrollment, alumni support, those are all great things to build into your post-secondary success structures and systems, but I think should come after you get the basics right.
So
did that answer that question?
Yeah, I think you did. And I think just to play it back a little bit from a generalized standpoint, just post-secondary success, it sounds like it's like, get the basics right, ask the fundamental questions about where this is showing up in the work, and then ensure the data is kind of consistent and visible so that progress can be tracked, in a way that's palatable, and also like the people doing the work can get bought in. From a change management standpoint, I'm curious, before we wrap up, just to ask a little bit about this, because change management is always a huge challenge. Maybe there's a school leader listening to this that is fired up about making data-driven changes in their organization, but they want to balance like I don't want to come in too heavy-handed with data and accountability, and I want to balance the like human side of this. Any recommendations just for seeing change management play out, as either at RMP or as you've worked with organizations on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think change management is really important, and it was like one of the least fun parts of my job, especially when you're founder and you go from like a tiny team where it's just like, all right, we're gonna do this, let's go, and then a much larger team where I couldn't remember everyone's name, especially like in COVID and Zoom life, and couldn't remember, like, I think you're teaching specials at that school, but help me remember. It's kind of awkward. And I forget the classroom management schema of like, there's either unintended enablers or more like dictatorial command oriented teachers. I'm more of an unintended enabler at my core, and had to learn to like be firmer and clearer and be okay with letting people down or having them be mad about a decision I made. I think getting the why right, getting the student story right, and understanding like why you're doing, and then clarity in your mind around what's most important, of like, no, my job as the leader of this school or my leader of this network or my leader of this team is to like actually be more super clear about what's most important and what we're going to drive for this year or this few years, and then bringing the discipline and communication around that is the most important part of change management. And of course you should base that in some reality and input with your team members. But creating that clarity, I think, is what's most important.
Love it. All right. So, James, I feel like we've talked a lot about kind of different aspects of data-driven, leadership, decision making, and as we come to a close here, I'm curious to ask you, like, if you think about kind of like the 80-20 of what we're talking about today, like what are the 1 to 2 things that someone who's listening to this could go and implement in short order to bring a more data-driven approach to their leadership? What would you say if you had to hang your hat on just a couple of these principles as we come to a close?
I think, are you asking the right questions? And then do you have the right data to support answering those questions? Where does it show up on your calendar? Are you bringing the discipline of execution around coming back to these data and these questions in a effective and disciplined way? And then are you communicating really clearly with your team around, this is what's most important. Here's how we're doing right now against this. And so here's what I want to, here's what we should celebrate. And here's what I want to see moving forward.
Yeah. Love it. Awesome. All right. So James, where can people go to learn more about your work in Willow Education? Where can we send them?
I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I didn't use LinkedIn for 10 years when I was running RMP, and that was a mistake. And now I use it every day. And willowed.org is our website. And I am all in on post-secondary success and very passionate about it. And if you'd like to just jam on that or learn more, happy to connect.
Okay. Awesome. Well, James, thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate your time and perspective today.
Thanks, Dan. Really fun. Appreciate it. Thanks for your good work in schools. It's the not always glamorous, but very important work to keeping schools running effectively and making sure students are there to learn.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@buyq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.